He handed his wife divorce papers on their wedding anniversary, right in front of their guests. The room froze. Champagne flutes trembled. His voice was calm, sharp, cruel. "You'll be free after tonight," he said. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. She smiled. Everyone thought it was shock, but it wasn't. When she gave him a simple white envelope in return, that smile became prophecy. By the next sunrise, his empire, his family, and his pride would collapse one signature at a time. Before we begin this unforgettable story of love, betrayal, and revenge, hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Let others witness how the woman they underestimated turned heartbreak into history. Stay till the end, because karma doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it wears heels, walks in silence, and smiles while everything burns. The anniversary dinner, Grant Mansion, Greenwich, Connecticut. The Grant Mansion glowed beneath chandeliers, filled with power, laughter, and luxury. 5 years of marriage had brought prestige to Alexander and Juliana Grant, or so it seemed. Guests whispered about their success, unaware that beneath the gold and wine, love had already died. Juliana moved through the crowd like light, elegant, graceful, untouchable. Her golden dress shimmered as she smiled politely, masking exhaustion behind perfection. Every eye adored her beauty. Every whisper envied her composure. But only she knew the truth. Tonight's celebration wasn't love. It was performance. At the head of the long marble table, Alexander Grant raised his glass. Charming as always, his dark tuxedo gleamed under the lights. His smile hid deceit. "To 5 years of strength," he toasted. Cameras flashed and guests cheered. Juliana smiled faintly beside him, hands folded on her lap, every heartbeat steady but cold. Her eyes drifted to the grand piano, where once he played love songs for her, now silent, forgotten. Their story had begun like a dream, but tonight she could feel it ending. The applause around them felt like mockery dressed as celebration. Across the room, Margaret Grant, Alexander's mother, watched her daughter-in-law with thinly veiled disdain. Her pearls sparkled, but her smirk was sharper than any jewel. "She looks radiant for someone soon to be replaced," she whispered to her husband, Richard Grant. He grunted quietly, sipping whiskey, his mind on tomorrow's merger with the Carter family. To them, Juliana was a phase, a temporary woman who'd serve her purpose. Only Alexander's arrogance rivaled their pride. Juliana sensed their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She knew this family too well to be surprised by their cruelty anymore. A waiter poured champagne as Alexander tapped his glass for silence. "Before dessert," he said confidently, "I have something important to announce." Cameras lifted. Conversations died. Juliana turned her head slightly, confused yet calm. Alexander reached into his suit pocket and unfolded a stack of legal papers. "Juliana," he said smoothly, "our time together has been meaningful, but moving forward, I'm choosing a different path." The words sliced through the air like glass. The room stiffened. Laughter faded. The pianist stopped playing mid-note. Juliana stared at him, not shocked, not broken, simply still. He continued, ignoring the gasps. "These," Alexander said, raising the papers, "are divorce documents. You'll receive everything you deserve, of course." His smile returned, practiced and perfect. "I'll ensure the process is dignified." His tone dripped with irony. Whispers filled the room instantly. "Divorce? Tonight? Why now?" Isabella Carter's name fluttered from someone's lips like poison. Juliana heard it. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but realization. So this was a show. Her humiliation served as entertainment for the wealthy. Yet her eyes stayed calm. She lifted her chin, refusing to give him the tears he wanted. Margaret Grant smiled wickedly from her seat. "Well," she whispered loudly, "I suppose congratulations are in order." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some rose, uncomfortable, while others stayed to witness the drama unfold. Juliana's fingers brushed her wedding ring. It glimmered under the lights, a reminder of vows broken long before this night. She slowly stood, her golden gown flowing elegantly as silence deepened. Every camera pointed toward her, expecting collapse, but her voice was soft, unshaken. You chose an interesting time for honesty, Alexander, she said. It took you 5 years to finally say what your eyes already confess. He chuckled, trying to appear composed. You've always been dramatic, Juliana, Alexander replied coldly. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Her lips curved slightly, not in sadness, but irony. You're right, she said softly. Let's not. She took the divorce papers gently from his hand, glanced at the signatures, then folded them neatly. Every motion was calm, deliberate, elegant. Happy anniversary, she whispered. The guests murmured, her words too graceful for a woman just abandoned. Then she set the papers beside her champagne glass and raised it high. To love, she said quietly. May it rest in peace. The toast stung more than any insult. Alexander's smile faltered, pride bruised. Around them, whispers swirled like wildfire. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Richard exhaled heavily, already regretting the public display. But Juliana stood tall, a vision of grace amid humiliation. Her poise disarmed them all. Even her enemies couldn't look away. She didn't shout, didn't throw a drink, didn't crumble. She only smiled politely at the people who pitted her. The silence that followed became her armor. Alexander had planned to break her in front of everyone. But somehow, her composure became the headline. As guests began to whisper apologies, Alexander pretended not to notice. He turned to speak with Richard, but his voice cracked slightly. Juliana saw it, that tiny flicker of doubt. He had expected tears, not serenity. Margaret leaned closer to her son. Ignore her calm, she hissed. She's nothing without your name. Juliana heard every word. She smiled gently and replied, You're right, Mrs. Grant. I'm nothing without his name. I'm everything with my own. Her tone silenced the room again. The air thickened. Even Alexander's arrogance wavered under the weight of her quiet strength. Juliana stepped back slowly, scanning the crowd one last time. Thank you all for coming, she said with poise. I appreciate your blessings. They'll guide me somewhere better. Her words sounded like farewell and prophecy. She turned toward the exit, her dress trailing like liquid gold behind her. Every eye followed her. The woman left behind, yet somehow untouchable. Alexander clenched his jaw, gripping the table. Richard muttered under his breath. Margaret fanned herself nervously. Juliana reached the door, paused, and looked back once. Not at her husband, but at the life she was finally walking away from. The silent gift, the mansion quieted after midnight. Guests had gone, leaving the faint echo of whispers and broken toast behind. Juliana's heels clicked against the marble as she walked the empty hallway leading to their bedroom. Her reflection in the mirror didn't look weak. It looked reborn. She entered their room and found Alexander pouring another drink. The scent of whiskey clung to his arrogance. You could have cried, he muttered without looking at her. It would have made things easier. Juliana placed her earrings gently on the dresser, her tone calm as water. You mistake silence for surrender, she replied softly. He turned to face her, clearly irritated by her composure. You knew this day would come, he said smugly. You never belonged in my world. His words hit the air like darts, but she didn't flinch. Juliana closed her suitcase slowly, every motion graceful, controlled. I built your world, Alexander, she said, her voice steady. You just redecorated it with greed. His jaw tightened, pride wounded. You should be grateful, he sneered. I'm ending this with dignity. She smiled faintly, almost pitying him. Dignity, she repeated. You wouldn't recognize dignity if it signed your paychecks. Juliana walked past him toward the nightstand, retrieving a small white envelope. Your gift, she said quietly. He frowned, half drunk, half curious. A gift? He repeated mockingly. You think this is a time for gifts? She met his gaze. It's tradition, she said. Anniversaries are for giving, and I'm giving you something you've earned. She placed the envelope in his hand, calm and certain. Open it after midnight, she whispered. You'll understand everything. His brows furrowed, arrogance masking confusion. You'll regret walking away like this, he warned. No, Juliana said softly. You'll regret thinking I ever would. She zipped her suitcase and rolled it toward the door. Alexander followed, still trying to dominate the silence. You'll be nothing without my name, he spat. Juliana paused and turned slightly. Her eyes glistened beneath the warm lamplight, not from sadness, but from awakening. You're right, she said softly. That's why I'm leaving behind. He laughed bitterly, tossing the envelope onto the bed. You'll come back, he said. They always come back. She looked at him one final time, a gentle smile breaking through her composure. Then you've clearly never met a woman who knows her worth. As she wheeled her suitcase through the grand corridor, Margaret appeared in the doorway, silk robe shimmering. Leaving already? She asked coldly. A smart woman would stay and fight for her place. Juliana stopped and turned toward her mother-in-law, eyes sharp but calm. A smart woman doesn't fight for what's rotten, she replied evenly. Margaret chuckled dryly. You think you can survive without this family? Juliana took a slow breath. I don't need your name, she said. I have my own. She walked away, heels echoing like punctuation marks against marble, a rhythm of closure. Outside, the sky was a sheet of silver clouds, thunder humming in the distance. The chauffeur held the door open, concern in his eyes. Are you all right, Mrs. Grant? He asked carefully. Juliana paused, looked back at the mansion's glowing windows, and smiled faintly. I was never all right here, she said, stepping into the car. But I will be. The car glided through the rain-slicked driveway, past fountains and perfectly trimmed hedges. Everything she once thought symbolized success. As lightning cracked across the sky, Juliana whispered to herself, some storms don't destroy you, they free you. Inside the mansion, Alexander sat alone, staring at the untouched envelope. Rain pounded against the windows, each drop sounding heavier than guilt. He poured another drink and smirked bitterly. She thinks she can scare me with paperwork, he muttered. The clock struck midnight. He grabbed the envelope, tearing it open with drunken impatience. A single flash drive slid out, along with a note in her elegant handwriting. Read before sunrise. His expression shifted, curiosity replacing arrogance. Read what? He said aloud, inserting the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered, then filled with folders marked confidential. The first document opened automatically. Co-founder agreement. Juliana Reynolds and Alexander Grant. His pupils dilated. Impossible, he whispered, scrolling faster. Dozens of legal files unfolded. Signatures, contracts, patents, emails. Every page carried both their names. The woman he'd erased from his company legally still owned half of it. His breathing quickened. How did she? He stopped mid-sentence. Scrolling again. A final folder appeared. FBI evidence. Panic surged. Inside were time-stamped reports linking his father Richard and Carter Holdings to insider trading. Each document was signed, sealed, and dated. His hands began to shake violently. Richard, he shouted, stumbling down the hall. His father appeared moments later, robe half open, eyes heavy with sleep. What now, Alex? Richard barked impatiently. Alexander tossed the flash drive onto the table. She knew everything, he yelled. Emails, contracts, the FBI's involved. Richard froze, eyes narrowing. FBI, he repeated, voice cracking. Alexander nodded frantically. We're finished, he said. She destroyed us before we even touched her. Margaret entered, robe clutched tight, confusion in her expression. What's happening? She demanded. Alexander sank into the chair, whispering hoarsely. She's not my weakness, she's my reckoning. Within minutes, phones rang across the mansion. News alerts exploded. Grant Enterprises under federal investigation. The family's faces glowed under the blue light of their screens. Margaret gasped, covering her mouth. Richard swore loudly, pacing across the rug. This can't be happening, he barked. Alexander sat motionless, staring at the documents, sweat gathering on his temples. Juliana's calm smile flashed through his mind. Read before sunrise, her note had said. He realized it wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. Outside, thunder roared and the storm finally broke. Inside, Everything Alexander once controlled began to collapse. The collapse begins. The night bled into dawn, but sleep never came to the Grant Mansion. The once bright estate now sat in eerie silence, glowing faintly under the storm's dim light. Alexander stood before the television as breaking news filled the screen. FBI confirms investigation into Grant Enterprises and Carter Holdings. Carter Holdings, the rival firm run by billionaire Charles Carter and his daughter Isabella, had long courted a merger with the Grants. His pulse raced. Margaret clutched her pearls. "Richard," she whispered, "what have you done?" Richard stared blankly. Alexander's pride, so loud hours ago, now shattered into whispers of disbelief and regret. Calls poured in from investors, partners, and lawyers, each one a dagger. "Alexander, this merger is radioactive," one voice warned. "Carter Holdings is under the same probe," another shouted. He ended every call with trembling hands. Margaret sobbed. "The Carters will ruin us," she cried. Richard slammed the table. "We used the Carter merger to stabilize our assets." His voice cracked with guilt. Alexander's chest tightened. He understood now. Juliana had known about the entire fraudulent scheme between Grant Enterprises and Carter Holdings. She hadn't just left him. She had buried him using his own secrets. Karma had arrived carrying a legal briefcase. Meanwhile, across town, Juliana sat by her window in a silk robe, sipping tea as the first light touched Manhattan skyline. The news played quietly on her television. The anchor's voice spoke her victory aloud. Federal authorities have confirmed that Juliana Reynolds, co-founder Grant Enterprises, provided evidence leading to the ongoing investigation. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her eyes glistened, reflecting peace instead of vengeance. Marcus Cole, her longtime friend and personal attorney, entered holding a stack of finalized documents. "It's all done," he said softly. Juliana nodded, whispering, "Let the truth breathe." The woman once silenced now owned the world's attention. Marcus placed a folder on the table, the new company registration. The embossed name read Reynolds and Blackwell Industries. Juliana traced the lettering gently with her fingertips. "It feels right," she murmured. Marcus smiled. "It's poetic," he said. "You rebuilt your empire on honesty, not greed." Juliana nodded. "And I didn't need revenge," she added. "I just needed freedom." The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. The elevator doors opened, revealing Jordan Blackwell, a billionaire investor known for rescuing collapsing empires with integrity. His calm presence filled the room like sunlight after thunder. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You've changed the game." Jordan placed his coat on the chair and extended his hand. Juliana shook it firmly, eyes steady. "You're looking at the new co-founder of Reynolds and Blackwell," Marcus said proudly. Jordan smiled. "No," he corrected gently. "You're looking at his heartbeat." Juliana's cheeks warmed slightly, but she didn't look away. "You believed in me when no one else did," she said. Jordan's tone softened. "Belief wasn't hard, Juliana. You just needed someone who saw what Alexander refused to." Silence filled the room, heavy yet peaceful. Outside, the sunrise painted the sky gold, marking the rebirth of the woman they thought destroyed. Back at the Grant Mansion, chaos spiraled. FBI agents flooded the driveway. Black vehicles parked across the lawn. Reporters gathered by the gate, shouting questions through microphones. Margaret screamed at Richard, "You promised this merger with Carter Holdings would save us." Richard threw his glass against the wall. "We used the Carters' inside information to rig stock values," he snapped. Juliana knew. She exposed everything. Cameras flashed through the windows. Alexander stood, motionless, pale as marble. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. He could almost hear Juliana's voice whispering, "You'll regret thinking I ever would." Inside the mansion, agents confiscated files, computers, and hard drives. Every step echoed finality. Richard tried negotiating, shouting about mutual partnerships and market intelligence. But the agents ignored him. Carter Holdings lawyers, once allies, had already issued denials. Margaret fainted on the sofa. Alexander stumbled into his study, slamming the door shut. His phone buzzed nonstop, journalists, creditors, and supposed friends now vultures. He opened his laptop again, staring at Juliana's note on the flash drive. Her handwriting looked serene, haunting. Read before sunrise. He finally understood. The sunrise wasn't her farewell. It was his downfall. Richard's arrest came swiftly. 2 agents handcuffed him as he shouted obscenities, his authority evaporating under the weight of federal silence. Margaret begged him to stop, clutching his arm. "He's innocent," she screamed, but the evidence said otherwise. Outside, cameras captured every frame. Headlines appeared instantly. Grant Enterprises and Carter Holdings face FBI seizure. Alexander watched helplessly as his father was dragged away. The man who taught him greed, now defined by disgrace. His knees trembled. For the first time in his life, Alexander Grant understood what real weakness felt like. Not poverty, but the loss of respect. By afternoon, the internet exploded. #Grant Scandal trended across every platform. Financial networks ran continuous coverage, showing arrest footage beside Juliana's calm interviews. Expert explained how Grant Enterprises and Carter Holdings had secretly exchanged insider information for profit, a scheme Juliana quietly exposed. The world saw 2 faces, one humiliated, one reborn. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his office, staring at the chaos. His phone rang again. Isabella Carter's assistant answered coldly. "Mr. Grant, Miss Carter wishes to end all professional and personal relations. She'll release a statement shortly." The line went dead, leaving him swallowed by silence and disgrace. Juliana turned off her television, folded her hands, and exhaled deeply. Marcus smiled gently. "It's over," he said. She shook her head. "No, Marcus," she replied. "It's just beginning." She stood and looked out the window at the skyline that once carried Alexander's name. "Revenge ends things," she whispered. "Justice begins them." Jordan joined her at the glass, his reflection beside hers. "And justice," he said softly, "looks better when it wins gracefully." Juliana smiled faintly, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was power delivered beautifully. The world had finally met Juliana Reynolds. The rise of Juliana Reynolds. Morning sunlight spilled to the floor-to-ceiling windows of Juliana's Manhattan penthouse, painting the skyline gold. The same city that once witnessed her humiliation now spoke her name with reverence. Calmly, she reviewed stacks of documents spread across the glass table. Across from her sat Marcus Cole, her longtime friend and personal attorney, the man who believed in her brilliance before Alexander saw her beauty. Marcus had guided her quietly through silence and storm, never doubting her resolve. His loyalty wasn't born from obligation. It was built on respect for the woman who turned betrayal into blueprint and heartbreak into empire. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "It's official," he said. "Reynolds and Blackwell Industries is recognized across all states." Juliana exhaled slowly, touching the embossed company seal. "It still feels unreal," she murmured. Marcus smiled. "You didn't imagine this, Juliana. You designed it." She gave a soft laugh. "I had no choice but to rebuild from ashes." His gaze warmed. "Not rebuild," he corrected gently. "You redefined power." She smiled faintly, pride flickering behind humility. Outside, sunlight danced on the skyline like quiet applause, as if the whole city finally understood her worth. Jordan Blackwell stood near the panoramic window, silent but observant. Known for transforming failing empires into ethical success stories, he had quickly become both Juliana's investor and confidant. "The markets have already responded," he said, turning toward them. "Your story restored faith in leadership." Juliana smiled softly. "Not my story," she replied. "The truth's." Jordan nodded. Truth just needed a stronger voice. Marcus handed her another folder. "Board members are already requesting interviews," he said. Juliana shook her head. "No press yet," she said firmly. "Let action speak first." In that moment, both men understood. Juliana Reynolds needed no introduction. Juliana walked toward the glass wall, the skyline shimmering behind her. We'll build this company differently, she said. No secrets, no silent greed. Jordan nodded approvingly. That's why investors trust you, he said. You lead with transparency, not fear. Marcus closed his laptop. The public believes you rebuilt the empire for redemption, he said thoughtfully. They're wrong, Juliana replied. I rebuilt it to restore balance. Her words echoed to the penthouse, calm but unshakable. Jordan's smile was quiet yet proud. Balance, he repeated. The foundation every empire forgets until it collapses. Juliana turned, her eyes steady. Then let's remind them. Later that morning, the trio gathered in the boardroom overlooking Central Park. A digital presentation illuminated the wall. Reynolds and Blackwell, vision, value, virtue. Jordan studied the chart lines, impressed by Juliana's precision. You understand business like chess, he said. Every move intentional, every sacrifice strategic. Marcus chuckled. She's been 3 steps ahead since the grants. Juliana smiled faintly. It's easy to think clearly when you have nothing left to lose. Jordan leaned closer. Now you have everything to lead. Her expression softened, eyes bright with quiet determination. Then I'll lead with purpose, she said, and let integrity sign every check. Across New York, headlines shifted from scandal to rebirth. Reynolds and Blackwell, the company built on truth. Television screens replayed Juliana's old humiliation beside her present triumph. Commentators marveled at her composure, her calm dominance, her refusal to gloat. Jordan watched silently. You become the standard, he said. Juliana smiled. I'd rather become the reminder, she replied. Marcus raised his glass of sparkling water. To reminders, he said. To truth. She nodded, eyes glowing, and to the silence that speaks louder than revenge. Their glasses touched lightly, the sound small but powerful, like the beginning of a new legacy rising. Meanwhile, inside his stripped-down office, Alexander sat behind an empty desk. Papers scattered across the floor. His once glorious nameplate lay face down. The television replayed Juliana's latest interview, her voice calm and strong. He muted it quickly, but the silence hurt more. The woman he'd tried to break now controlled the narrative of his life. The empire he'd stolen had returned to its rightful owner, purified under her name. He buried his face in his hands, whispering to himself, She never raised her voice, yet she destroyed me completely. His tears weren't for loss. They were for recognition. Too late. Reporters filled the sidewalks outside Reynolds and Blackwell headquarters, shouting questions that bounced against a glass tower. Juliana, will you acquire what's left of Grand Enterprises? Someone called. She smiled faintly and answered, No, I don't build from rot. The crowd erupted with cheers. Marcus guided her through the cameras as Jordan followed protectively. Inside the elevator, Jordan said quietly, You realize this isn't just business anymore. You become a movement. Juliana turned toward him. Then let it move people toward truth, she said softly. The elevator doors closed, sealing behind her the noise of a world she'd already conquered. Inside the atrium, Juliana stood before her employees, men and women inspired by her courage. The audience was silent, waiting for her to speak. She held the microphone firmly. This company, she began, isn't here to chase profit. It's here to prove power can be honest. A ripple of applause grew into thunder. Marcus glanced proudly at Jordan, who nodded approvingly. We lead differently, she continued. We rise without stepping on anyone. The cheers became overwhelming. Juliana smiled modestly, lifting a hand for quiet. This isn't revenge, she said. It's restoration. The word echoed graceful, fierce, unforgettable. That night, Juliana stood on her balcony overlooking Manhattan's endless lights. The air was calm, her heart finally at peace. You've done it, Marcus said softly, standing beside her. You built something pure from chaos. She smiled faintly. Purity doesn't erase scars, she said. It makes them meaningful. Jordan joined them, hands in his pockets. You didn't just win, he said. You changed the definition of power. Juliana looked out over the skyline. Power, she whispered, isn't loud anymore, it's graceful. The wind swept her hair gently as New York glowed beneath her feet. The Queen had reclaimed her throne. The fall of the Grants. News anchors spoke in grave tones across every major network. Federal investigators confirmed criminal proceedings against Grant Enterprises and Carter Holdings. One reporter announced, Carter Holdings, the corporation once led by billionaire Charles Carter and his daughter Isabella, now faced the same legal storm they helped create. Investigators traced fraudulent trades across both companies, exposing hidden accounts and shell corporations. Though Charles Carter faced arrest, Isabella escaped formal charges by claiming ignorance, abandoning Alexander the moment the scandal broke. The supposed family merger between them had been nothing more than a paper mask for power and deceit. As evidence mounted, the illusion shattered. The empire Alexander believed untouchable was now the centerpiece of its own disgrace. At the Grant residence, Alexander paced the marble floor, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. His mother sat motionless, clutching a rosary she hadn't touched in years. Richard could have stopped this, she whispered. Alexander stared toward the staircase, remembering the sound of his father's arrest echoing through the halls. No, he muttered bitterly. We built this. The walls once lined with portraits of triumph now felt haunted. The same house that celebrated power now reeked of downfall. He looked around and saw ghosts of laughter, success, and arrogance. Everything he had mocked Juliana for losing, he had now lost 1,000 times worse. Meanwhile, Richard Grant sat in a holding cell at a federal detention center, his hands trembling as he reread the charges. Decades of manipulation had finally caught up. Insider trading, fraud, conspiracy. He tried convincing himself he'd done it for legacy, but deep down, he knew it had always been for ego. You made us kings, he told Alexander once. Now, in an orange jumpsuit, he realized kings without morals were only thieves with crowns. His lawyer warned him not to speak to reporters. Still, he whispered Juliana's name under his breath, the only person who'd ever predicted this ending. Outside the Grant mansion, a storm gathered again. Reporters filled the gates, flashbulbs cutting through the rain. Margaret tried avoiding the cameras, but they followed her mercilessly. Mrs. Grant, one shouted, how does it feel knowing your daughter-in-law exposed the family? She froze, mascara streaking as thunder rolled overhead. She was never one of us, she muttered, her voice trembling. That's why she survived. The crowd gasped at her honesty. Inside, Alexander poured another drink, his hands shaking. For the first time, he understood the strength behind Juliana's silence. She didn't have to speak to make the world listen. Across the city, Juliana's name dominated every screen. Reynolds and Blackwell, the company that rebuilt integrity. Analysts dissected her strategies. Journalists praised her restraint. Jordan and Marcus watched proudly from her office as she declined interview after interview. Your silence speaks louder than statements, Jordan said. Juliana smiled faintly. Words fade, she replied. Actions echo. Marcus leaned forward. The Grants filed bankruptcy this morning. She nodded, emotionless. They built on deceit. It was bound to collapse. Jordan studied her for a moment. No victory speech? She shook her head gently. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs peace. Alexander wandered through the empty corridors of his corporate headquarters. Chairs overturned, lights dimmed, monitors blank. His empire was a mausoleum. Employees who once worshipped him avoided eye contact. Some whispered, others packed. He paused before the massive portrait of himself hanging behind the boardroom chair. Destroy it, he ordered coldly. Maintenance workers hesitated. Now, he barked. As the frame crashed to the floor, glass shattered across the tiles, scattering fragments of his reflection. He stared down at the broken pieces, each shard reflecting a face he no longer recognized. For the first time, Alexander truly saw himself defeated. By evening, Grant Enterprises ceased all trading. The board voted unanimously to dissolve operations. Journalists called it the swiftest fall in corporate history. Alexander sat before a wall of screens broadcasting his family's humiliation. One anchor described Juliana as the quiet storm that justice rode on. Another played the clip of her speech. "We rise without stepping on anyone." He turned the TV off, unable to bear the sound of her strength. The irony stung. He had mocked her compassion, yet that same compassion now crowned her legacy. His arrogance had built castles. Her integrity had outlived them all. Later that night, a delivery arrived at Alexander's apartment. Inside the small box rested a single fountain pen, the one Juliana had once used to sign their marriage license. A folded note accompanied it. "Signatures end things, Alexander, but some begin history." His hands trembled as he read it. The ink still bore faint traces of her handwriting. Elegant yet sharp, he realized the pen symbolized everything he destroyed: promises, trust, legacy. He placed it carefully on the table, unable to throw it away. The weight of it felt heavier than any verdict. Juliana's silence had spoken again. Margaret sold the mansion, quietly, moving into a secluded estate upstate. She refused interviews, avoiding the pity of the same society she once ruled. Richard awaited trial, publicly disgraced. And Alexander, the once celebrated billionaire, was left with nothing but memories. Friends vanished. Banks closed accounts. Even Isabella Carter had released a statement denying their relationship. Alone, he realized karma had excellent timing. The empire that once bowed to him now belonged to the woman he betrayed. Across every newspaper, one headline remained constant: Reynolds and Blackwell redefined corporate ethics. Juliana didn't need to destroy him. The truth already had. Juliana stood before the mirror in her office, straightening her blazer before the evening's gala. Her reflection no longer looked like the woman Alexander once dismissed. It looked like leadership. Marcus entered, smiling proudly. "You've rewritten history," he said. Jordan followed, buttoning his jacket. "No," Juliana replied softly. "I just corrected it." The three exchanged a knowing glance before walking toward the elevator. "Tonight isn't celebration," she added. "It's closure." As the doors closed, the city glittered beneath them. Juliana had risen higher than revenge could ever reach, because her power came from forgiveness, not fury. The Gala of Poetic Justice. Golden chandeliers glowed above the grand ballroom of the Aurora Foundation Gala. The air shimmered with elegance as the city's elite gathered to honor Juliana Reynolds, the woman who rebuilt truth from ashes. Cameramen whispered, "That's her." Her black gown flowed like midnight silk as she stepped gracefully onto the red carpet. Flashbulbs captured the power in her calm smile. Jordan Blackwell walked beside her, commanding quiet admiration, while Marcus followed proudly. It wasn't just a gala, it was Destiny's stage. The woman once humiliated for love was now being celebrated for leadership. Her silence had become history's headline. As Juliana entered the ballroom, the crowd rose to its feet, applauding thunderously. "Juliana Reynolds, Businesswoman of the Year," the announcer declared. She walked toward the podium, eyes steady, grace unbroken. Cameras flashed endlessly. Reporters whispered, "She's flawless." Across the room, unseen by most, Alexander Grant stood alone near the exit, hidden behind a column. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his face pale. He shouldn't have been there, but he came. As he watched her take the stage, every memory returned like a haunting. He wasn't looking at a woman he lost. He was looking at the legacy he destroyed. Juliana stood behind the podium, her poise magnetic. "5 years ago," she began, "I was publicly dismissed by the man who vowed to protect me. I lost everything I had built, or so I thought." The audience leaned closer. "But sometimes," she continued, "loss clears the path for purpose." Her voice trembled briefly, then steadied. "Power without integrity collapses. Love without respect poisons. And truth," she paused, eyes shimmering under golden light. "Truth always finds its way home." The crowd erupted in applause. In that moment, her pain had evolved into poetry, and her victory glowed brighter than any crown. As the applause echoed, Alexander's knees weakened. His mind replayed that fateful night, the anniversary dinner, her calm goodbye, her golden gown trailing like sunset. But another image cut through the memory. Isabella Carter, smiling across candlelight weeks later. Flashback, a luxury hotel rooftop glowing with champagne lights. After the merger, we'll rule the market, Isabella had whispered, her diamond bracelet catching firelight. We'll be unstoppable, Alex. He had believed her, believed the illusion of loyalty built on greed. The flashback shattered as the crowd's clapping returned. The woman who loved his power had vanished with his downfall. Alexander closed his eyes, another flashback igniting like punishment. The same Isabella stood before reporters after the FBI raid, cool and composed. There was never a binding agreement, she said coldly. Mr. Grant acted independently. Cameras exploded as she walked away. Back in the ballroom, Alexander felt the memory choke him. His chest tightened with realization. Juliana had left him with dignity. Isabella had left him with shame. He whispered bitterly, "You traded angels for liars." His reflection in the wine glass stared back hollowly. For the first time, Alexander Grant didn't see success or pride. He saw consequence. Juliana's speech continued. "Reynolds and Blackwell stands for rebuilding," she said, her voice carrying across the grand hall. "Not just companies, but people. We prove that failure isn't the end, it's a foundation." Jordan and Marcus applauded beside the front table, pride glowing in their eyes. Juliana's sincerity reached beyond business. It touched hearts. "Forgiveness," she added gently, "isn't weakness. It's understanding that peace is the loudest form of revenge." The audience rose again, inspired by her strength. Her final words weren't vengeance. They were redemption. Juliana Reynolds didn't just win. She transcended. She became every woman's definition of power. Alexander slipped quietly toward the exit, unable to breathe beneath the weight of her words. Every line she spoke pierced like confession. He moved past glittering tables, eyes lowered, avoiding the faces that once greeted him with admiration. Each step echoed with irony. The same halls that once celebrated his arrogance now hosted his defeat. He stopped near the door, turning back for one final glance. Juliana stood surrounded by applause and light. He whispered to himself, "You deserve the world, and I gave you a storm." A tear escaped, falling silently, unnoticed, just like his apologies. Outside the gala, the cold air bit at Alexander's face. Reporters swarmed for statements, but none recognized him anymore. He wandered aimlessly through Times Square, screens flashing with Juliana's image, her name glowing above billboards reading, "Reynolds and Blackwell, built on truth." He stopped beneath one display, watching her smile radiate against the city lights. "She's everywhere," he murmured. It wasn't jealousy, it was justice. As rain began to fall, he realized this was his punishment, to live long enough to witness the success of the woman he tried to break. The rain mixed with tears he could no longer hide. Meanwhile, Juliana stepped out onto the gala balcony, the night air cool against her skin. Jordan approached silently. "You did it," he said softly. "You rewrote your ending." She smiled faintly, her eyes on the city skyline. "I didn't rewrite it," she said. "I just took back the pen." Marcus joined them, offering a glass of champagne. "To victory," he toasted. Juliana shook her head. "To peace." The three clinked glasses quietly under the moonlight. Behind them, applause still filled the ballroom, but Juliana no longer needed it. Her validation didn't come from praise. It came from closure. Far below the balcony, Alexander stood in the rain, looking up at the glowing rooftop where Juliana stood. Her silhouette framed by moonlight looked angelic, untouchable. He whispered softly, "I never deserved you." The city roared beneath his silence. A cab splashed by, but he didn't move. He watched until she disappeared inside, the reflection of her name shining in every puddle. Then he turned away slowly, carrying nothing but regret. Above him, banners for Reynolds and Blackwell fluttered proudly. Juliana had reclaimed everything he'd taken, not through revenge, but through grace. And grace was the one thing he'd never learned. The price of regret. The morning after the gala, sunlight filtered through the blinds of Alexander's apartment. Empty bottles littered the marble counter. He sat slumped on the sofa, staring at the pen Juliana had once used to sign their marriage license. It gleamed faintly under the light, mocking him with memory. He whispered, "You sign love and I sign greed." The echo of his own words filled the silence. Outside, city horns blared. The same world that once applauded him now forgot his name. He looked out the window at a billboard of Juliana, smiling. Her peace was his punishment. Across town, Juliana sat in her office, wrapped in the stillness of dawn. The world was hers now, yet her eyes carried softness, not pride. Marcus entered quietly, handing her the morning paper. The headline read, "Grant Enterprises officially declares bankruptcy." She glanced once, then folded it neatly. "Closure," she murmured. Marcus smiled. "You're free, Juliana." She shook her head. "No one's free until they forgive." She looked out the window, thoughtfully. "I don't hate him anymore," she whispered. Marcus nodded in quiet understanding. It wasn't victory she sought. It was peace. And she'd finally found it within herself. Jordan entered moments later, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You didn't sleep," he observed. Juliana smiled faintly. "Peace doesn't need sleep." He chuckled softly. "You're the only person who wins gracefully and still works at sunrise." She accepted the coffee, grateful. "Winning isn't about applause," she said quietly. "It's about not losing yourself." Jordan admired her calm resilience. "You never lost yourself," he said. "You just had to meet her again." She smiled genuinely for the first time. "Then maybe I should thank him," she said softly. "Without betrayal, I'd never found my purpose." The words sounded like healing. Meanwhile, Alexander walked through Central Park, the same place where he once proposed to Juliana under cherry blossoms. The trees now stood bare, branches skeletal against the winter sky. He remembered her laughter, how she'd said, "Love shouldn't feel like performance." He'd smiled then, pretending to understand. Now, surrounded by strangers, he finally did. He sat on their old bench, tracing her initials still carved faintly into the wood. "JR," he whispered. His chest tightened. She had built a world that would remember her forever. He had built one that forgot him overnight. Regret became his only remaining companion. At Reynolds and Blackwell headquarters, a charity initiative was announced, Project Rebuild. Juliana launched it personally to support women, rebuilding their lives after corporate or domestic betrayal. Cameras flashed as she said, "Strength isn't born from success. It's born from survival." Her compassion drew thunderous applause. Jordan and Marcus stood behind her, proud. Yet when she looked into the cameras, her smile carried no vengeance, only grace. "This project," she said, "is for every woman who was told she couldn't rise again." Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. The audience felt it. Her pain had become power, beautifully. News outlets replayed the press conference for days. Journalists called Juliana the heart of modern leadership. Business schools began teaching her methods as ethics models. Social media overflowed with admiration. Yet she stayed humble, avoiding fame seduction. "If I start believing the praise," she told Marcus, "I'll forget the lesson." He nodded. "And what lesson is that?" She smiled gently. "Never let success make you the villain in someone else's story." Her wisdom resonated deeply. The same humility that once cost her everything now made her unforgettable. Juliana Reynolds had become more than a name. She had become a principle. One evening, Alexander attended a small church on the city's edge. It was nearly empty. Candles flickered along the aisle. He knelt at the last pew, whispering to himself, "Forgive me, not for losing her, but for not deserving her." His voice cracked. A priest passed quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder without speaking. Alexander lowered his head, tears falling freely. The world might forget him, but his conscience never would. He finally understood Juliana's strength. Forgiveness wasn't mercy for others. It was freedom for yourself. Yet for him, that realization came far too late. Months passed. The city healed. Juliana thrived. One morning, she received a handwritten letter without a return address. Inside was the same fountain pen she had sent Alexander. On the note, his handwriting trembled. "You were right. Some signatures begin history." She stared at it quietly for a long time. There was no anger, only peace. He found his truth, she whispered. Marcus entered moments later, asking gently, "Old ghosts?" She smiled faintly. "No, just reminders." She placed a letter in a drawer and closed it softly. The past didn't haunt her anymore. It humbled her. Weeks later, Juliana was invited to speak at a global leadership summit in Washington, D.C. She stood beneath bright lights, addressing thousands. "Success," she said, "isn't the absence of betrayal. It's surviving it without becoming bitter." The audience stood, applauding thunderously. Jordan watched proudly from backstage. She ended her speech with quiet conviction. Forgiveness isn't surrender. It's how strength speaks softly. As the crowd roared, Juliana looked up at the ceiling lights, feeling tears gather. The pain that once defined her story had finally turned into purpose. Her scars didn't weaken her legacy. They authored it. That night, Juliana walked alone along the Lincoln Memorial, reflecting pool, moonlight glimmering across the water. The city felt still, almost sacred. She whispered to the stars, "I forgive you, Alexander." The words floated like prayer. In the silence that followed, the wind felt lighter, the night warmer. Somewhere far away, Alexander sat quietly in his small apartment, staring out the window, unaware she'd finally let go. Juliana smiled through tears. Her peace was complete. Power hadn't made her great. Grace had. The reflection of the monument shimmered beside her, a mirror of resilience, forgiveness, and rebirth.